keynote speaker, Ralph Martire. So Ralph is the Arthur Roosevelt Endowed Professor of Public Policy at Roosevelt University. He teaches courses on public policy in general and fiscal and education policy specifically. He also serves as the Executive Director of the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability, the CTBA, also a sponsor team. The CTBA is a bipartisan nonprofit think tank. It ensures that public policies are fair and just and promote opportunity for all, regardless of race, ethnicity, or income class. During his time at CTBA, he played a key role in obtaining many legislative successes, including the passage of the Evidence-Based Model of Education Fund in 2018. Ralph was appointed by Governor Pritzker to serve on his Budget and Innovation Committee. He also served as a member of the Equity and Excellence in Education Commission during the Obama administration. He's been featured as a tax policy expert for numerous television and radio news programs such as WTTW and WPWR, and is also a regular columnist for the State Journal Register and the Daily Herald on issues involving education, government accountability, tax, fiscal, and budget policies. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ralph Martire.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
So I am Ralph Martire. I am the Executive Director of the Bipartisan Center for Tax and Budget Accountability. So our organization does have Democrats and Republicans on our board who either like or trust each other very much. But that's really good for us as a staff because we don't care about ideology. We focus on best practices and data. And I can't tell you the number of times I've had a member of my board ask me, gee, Ralph, can we move CTBA to the left on this issue or to the right on this issue? I'm like, I can't even actually think about that. Here are the best practices, here are the data, here are the demographically driven needs, here's where we're going. So that ends that discussion pretty quickly. And I'm thrilled to be here tonight to help you celebrate the 10th anniversary of the chapter of the League of Women Voters sitting here in Bloomingdale and Roselle. I think that's a great achievement. I mean, it's a really wonderful thing for the last 10 years. If you think about my job, I do tax policy for a living. I have to go to a lot of communities that are wealthy and explain why taxes are really good and why they should be paid more and why that money's not going to go back to their community but to other communities across the state where there are greater needs. And believe it or not, that's not quite as fun as it may sound. So I'm actually pretty happy to be invited anywhere, really, to be able to talk about good government policy with a group of folks that are willing to hear that message. And a little bit more about my background, because I want to tamper expectations about this speech. Before I became a tax policy nerd, I was a business attorney. I was a partner in a law firm. I was head of our mergers and acquisitions, structured finance, and intellectual property groups. I was pretty much an evil corporate lawyer, very good at it. Proud. Didn't have this lifelong commitment to peace and justice. So now I see concern. Right? Your face, your face, your face. This guy's a corporate lawyer and a tax. This speech is going to be brutal. And coffee is being served. But I promise you I'm going to allay those fears because I'm going to follow the advice of the late great Senator Paul Simon who talked to me about giving a speech. And Paul Simon said there's three things you have to do when you go and give a speech like what I'm doing tonight. Thing number one, have some kind of engaging opening. You don't want people to run out before you even get started. So hopefully you're a little engaged, we've crossed that threshold and we can move on. The second thing he said, make sure your closing is memorable in a way that matters to your audience. Your speech is about your audience, not about you. Try to figure that out. It's all right. Engaging opening, memorable closing. What else? He says, oh, here's the third thing. It's the most important. Don't cram very much between those two. No such thing as a bad short speech. So I am going to follow that advice to the letter and try to talk about the mission of your organization in the national context. I'm frankly going to open with stating the obvious only because the obvious is incredible right now. We're living in a tumultuous time for our nation, for our democracy, frankly, for anyone who cares about public policy. I mean, think about what we've witnessed in the last few years. Right now in America, still to this day, a significant portion of our population doesn't believe the current president was legitimately elected. The phrase election denier is something people bandy about in regular conversation. Are you kidding me? In America? We have a former president who is currently indicted for conspiring with lawyers and White House staff to undermine the results of the last election in a number of different ways, but in particular, by conspiring to appoint a group of fake electors in key swing states. In America? We witnessed thousands of Americans calling themselves patriots storming the Capitol in a failed attempt to intimidate Republican Vice President Mike Pence and Congress into not recognizing the legitimacy of the last election. Of course, it doesn't end there. Read the recent papers. We have a senior senator in New Jersey that right now is under indictment for acting illicitly as an agent of a foreign country and receiving gold ingots as part of his payoff. What? And while that's going on, by the way, it took Congress 22 days to name a new speaker. You know, I never thought I would see anything like this in America. Never, ever. If only we had an organization that, I don't know, was committed to empowering voters and defending democracy. I mean, that mission is more important now than ever, if you think about it. And the real genius of the League of Women Voters, in my mind, as I look at what you've done and what you've stood for, is you've gone out of your way to make sure you provide good, sound information to voters, not just about the big issues that we are facing, because you're great at that, you're great at your issues, but you also provide good information about the candidates running for these offices, candidate forums. When those folks get elected, they are the ones that will either deal with or fail to deal with our big issues. And it's a true civic service you provide by giving this real, clear, fact-based information to voters so they have the opportunity to think before they act. You also create the predicate for what might be called bipartisanship. Now, that's a word that's not used a lot anymore, but it matters. I think our former president, the late John F. Kennedy, said it best when he said, look, let us not seek the Republican answer or the Democratic answer, but the right answer. The right answer doesn't belong to either party. The right answer is an ideological. The right answer meets the needs of the community. It responds to best practices. It's data or evidence-based. And we can develop bipartisan support around doing the right thing if we just stay focused, like the League has, like a laser, on making sure at least the groundwork continues to exist for that kind of bipartisan collaboration. And these may sound like, you know, I'm just pandering to the audience and they're lofty words, but they're really not. Bipartisanship can lead to transformational positive changes in America. And I'm not just saying that, I'm going to give you a few concrete examples. I'm going to make you guys think, give you a little history lesson. 1935, something called the Social Security Act passed on a bipartisan basis. Wouldn't have gotten over the threshold without both Democrats and Republicans supporting it. This act is so important that if it didn't exist today, if we didn't have Social Security today, 4 out of every 10 seniors in our country would be in poverty. 4 out of every 10. One thing you may not know about Social Security is it doesn't just boost livelihoods for seniors. Last year, it lifted 1.1 million children out of poverty. Children. And in fact, when compared to everything else we've done, no program lifts more people out of poverty every single year than does Social Security. This is a bipartisan piece of legislation. Let's jump forward ahead a little bit. 1964, Civil Rights Act. That passed. What did it do? It banned racial discrimination and segregation in public accommodations, public education, and any state or local program that receives federal funding. What? That's a big transformational change. It didn't happen without bipartisan support. In fact, although it was initially introduced by JFK, he was assassinated before it became law. LBJ pushed this legislation, but he couldn't get it done. The Civil Rights Act was actually debated in the Senate for 60 consecutive days in a filibuster. Longest filibuster ever. What broke it? A liberal Democrat from Minnesota, Senator Humphrey, reached out to a conservative Republican from Illinois named Dirksen. And they worked together to modify just a little language around the edges that was enough to get 27 Republicans to join with 44 Democrats, break the filibuster, and pass that law. Republican support of Democratic initiative, bipartisanship. Very next year, 1964, we got the Voting Rights Act. Under that law, state governments were banned from passing legislation that denied black folk the right to vote. Transformative. Wouldn't have happened without Republican Senator Jacob Javits of New York reaching across the aisle and working with incredibly liberal Democratic Senator Teddy Kennedy of Massachusetts and none other than Birch Bayh of Indiana to put together a coalition of moderate to conservative Democrats and Republicans to push that over the edge. Another piece of transformational legislation. In fact, 1965 was a good year for transformational legislation. We also got Medicaid and Medicare passed that year. I probably don't have to give you too much information for why these things are big deals. They were done on a bipartisan basis. Bipartisan basis. Medicaid today not only covers almost 19% of our population and provides health insurance to low-income folks that could never afford it otherwise. Did you realize it covered 41% of the births in America last year? 41% of the births covered by Medicaid. It's bipartisan law. And Medicare, when that legislation passed in 1965, less than half of the seniors in our country had health insurance of any kind. Less than half. 2 years later, it was over 97%. Transformational bipartisan collaboration. Jump forward to 1970. What happened then? Clean Air Act amendment. Passed under Richard Nixon. Was a very strong supporter of the environment in the Clean Air Act. Needed bipartisan support to get through, and importantly, it not only said, gee, we ought to have air that doesn't kill us. That's, okay, great, thank you for coming up with that one. It also created the basis for preempting state law when it came to environmental protection. So now, there isn't a jury-rigged amount of different state laws covering environmental protection, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit more here. Federal law preempts. The only thing states can do is put into place protections that are greater than what the feds put in place. Transformational law. Most recently, because there's not a lot of examples of recent bipartisan collaboration, sadly, we do have the 2021 Bipartisan Infrastructure Act that passed under President Biden, right? $1 trillion investment in doing things like providing access to high-speed internet to rural communities, rebuilding our railroads, our bridges, our highways and roads, and not just 290. Although it really seems like 290 is being rebuilt every single year. I live in the Oak Park River Forest area. I am on 290 way too much of my life. I want all those moments back. This was big transformational stuff. It's also stuff that happened far away. So is there anything like that that happened in Illinois? That's a good question. And I'm going to respond to that question by making you answer some questions. Question number 1. Come up with some adjectives to describe a place that intentionally, and despite having great wealth, underfunded the education for the vast majority of its children for generations. Well, that's not an adjective, that's a noun. Jumping ahead. Good answer. Jumping ahead. How about more adjectives? It particularly underfunded the education of black children, brown children, and children who are learning the English language. A greater disadvantage than your typical underfunded school. You're right, adjectives like inequitable, unfair, ignorant, all those things in place. But the one noun that matters is Illinois. This was, in fact, the state of Illinois until about 6 years ago. 6 years ago, that evidence-based funding formula passed. And Illinois replaced the absolute worst, most inequitable school funding formula in America. And by the way, that's not me talking, that's the Education Trust, who said that about Illinois school funding formula in 2017, last year, the old one. With a model, the evidence-based funding formula, now get this, it's a crazy design. It funds those educational practices that the research say actually enhance student achievement over time. Huh, it pays for what works. What a crazy way to go about funding education, honestly. And the legislation itself creates what's called an adequacy formula to make sure every school district has an adequate amount of resources to meet the educational needs of the children attending that school. But because it's got this focus on adequacy, it is also equitable. Why do I say that? The model itself automatically adjusts the amount of resources a school district gets based on its unique student population. Have more low-income kids, the model adjusts, you get more. Have more special needs kids, the model adjusts, you get more. Have more English learners, the model adjusts, you get more. So that if it's fully funded, I should say when it's fully funded, because that thing will get fully funded, every school district in Illinois will actually have the capacity to provide its children with the education they need to be successful in the modern world. That's transformational change. It didn't happen without bipartisan support. In fact, you know, the main co-sponsors of that legislation initially were two Democrats, Senator Lightford and Representative Will Davis. But they were quickly joined by a Republican named Bob Pritchard. You all know Bob Pritchard. Farm Republican, conservative guy, good guy. He really put together a coalition of about 16 or 17 Republicans that ended up pushing the evidence-based funding formula over the edge into passage during the administration of Governor Rauner and the presidency of Donald Trump. This was not the political environment you would think a major piece of bipartisan legislation focused on equity and adequacy would pass, and yet it did. And you know who helped lay the groundwork for that great bipartisan collaboration? The League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters for generations noticed how inequitable the school funding system was in Illinois, and held, how many town forums did the League hold? Informing voters, taxpayers, both parties, this system is inequitable. This system over-relies on property taxes. This system has to go. But the League did more than that. The League didn't just talk about the problem, it also held events highlighting solutions. And when the evidence-based funding formula came down the pike, I swear the League must have held, and this is almost an exact number, a cajillion town hall meetings across the state of Illinois. And I know that's almost an exact number because I spoke at most. I didn't see my wife for 6 months. I swear it's really up to just bye, honey. Well, our marriage is healthy, maybe that helped. I don't know. Could be. But the activism of the League of Women Voters created a political dynamic where a bipartisan group of legislators could collaborate and push transformational change over the threshold into law in Illinois. So, none of this stuff I'm talking about is easy. Bipartisanship, that's not easy. Look at how polarized our society is today. Trying to overcome bias and ignorance and get fat, it's not easy. Trying to overcome charged rhetoric that's very populist in nature that appeals to our preconceived notions, that's not easy, but it's necessary. We need the League of Women Voters. This is exactly what you do. And you're more important now when things are difficult than when everyone's all happy and swimming around together. So I don't have a lot of advice for you. I really don't. Except for this. Keep doing what you're doing. Empower voters. Defend democracy. It makes a difference. Thank you.
For the